Welcome to the Conscious Dominance Podcast, where Andrew and Eric, two dominant men in dom-sub relationships, discuss how we approach our dominant roles from a conscious and loving place, and what we learn about ourselves through the deep intimacy that these power exchange dynamics make possible. Sit back and enjoy the show. Eric, let's do this Conscious Dominance Podcast.
Sounds good, Andrew. It's good to be here.
It is good to be here. And, I was interviewed on someone else's podcast just last week. And what was really interesting in that podcast, the first question he asked me was, what are the healthy traits of positive masculinity in dominance? And because I like kind of shaking things up and making people uncomfortable sometimes by really speaking the deepest of the truths out loud when people don't expect to hear them, the answer I gave him was sensitivity. And whenever that topic comes up, there's this big, around dominance, there's this big, like, not that, anything but that, right? And the reason I say that is because, to me, sensitivity is what gives dominance its oomph. It's the ability to tune into what your submissive is going through, what she is experiencing, what's happening in your experience of her and in your experience of your own life, to be able to make sure that you are being a dominant and a leader and not a tyrant or a dick. It's our sensitivity that allows us the capacity to recognize what the hell is going on around us. We've got to be able to be attuned. That's another word for sensitivity, in the way that I look at it, is attunement. And that challenges people because, in the same podcast, I heard the person interviewing me say that he was taught that love has no place in authority-based relationships. And I'm like, the fuck are you talking about? You can't do this without love if you have a heart at all. So I'd love to hear from your perspective what sensitivity and openness and attunement and all of that has been for you. And I'll share back a little bit too about what my past with that word has been. But yeah, I'd love to hear what that is for you.
Yeah, thank you. I love, by the way, that you brought that up as kind of a lead. I think there's a number of things that come to mind when you mention that, and I think it's internal sensitivity and then external sensitivity. And I think if I have found that if I'm not attuned and sensitive to my needs, my emotional needs, my inner vulnerabilities, my inner feminine, the parts of me that need to be nurtured, that are feeling things, wounds, places that I may have had some sort of trauma or some kind of thing. Like, you think about it like this: if you go out into the world and you have some sort of place of physical ailment, something that's sore, and you just proceed ignoring that, and it's not just sore that like if you act just normal, you'll wreck it again. You have to adjust for that.
Kind of like your shoulder and your
like
surf injury right now.
Yeah, exactly. Same kind of situation. If you ignore it and just proceed, you're just going to make it worse. You're going to make it worse, and it might pop, and then you react, right?
Yeah.
And so the sensitivity allows us to recognize where we have these vulnerable spots. Where are the spots that we need to give attention to? Where we need to show up to? Where we need to find some healing, find some place where we feel whole? Because when we are feeling off and when we're feeling a lack, we're going to project that out into the world. We're going to project and externalize that. And so where we're feeling sensitivity internally, that's going to be a trigger point. And that it goes back to this idea of reactivity versus response. And so when I'm acting from a place where I just react, like a habituated reaction, what I'm doing is I'm protecting my sensitive, vulnerable places. But if I am unaware of my sensitive, vulnerable places, I'm more likely to react much more. If I become aware of those places, work on them, nurture them, heal them, what I'm doing is I'm strengthening myself. So in a contradictory kind of way, the more sensitive we are, the stronger we are. Like there it is, you're exactly correct. It's just like, think of an instrument that is an instrument that is a navigational tool. If that's increases in sensitivity, it increases in efficacy, right? And we are navigational tools
and value. Like,
and value. Correct. The masculine is a navigational tool. We are here to direct, to lead, to tell us where to go, north, south, east, west. What's happening? What's the context? Where are we going? That needs to be sensitive so we can feel not only our internal sensitivity, but also externally. What's the context of the situation? What's going on? Where are we reading the situation? Like, you go into a situation, every time I go out into public and I'm with Rachel, I'm scanning, especially if I'm in the city or anywhere, all the time. I'm scanning who's walking towards us, what's happening over here, who's this person, and then I'm feeling their energy as they're coming, what's happening. My sensitivity is paramount in those situations. And it's paramount that I'm knowing, is it somebody out there or is it my issue that's happening? What's happening in the relationship? This happens in everything. This happens in the bedroom as well. If I get triggered by something that she's doing, because it affects me in some sort of way, and I'm feeling overly sensitive to that moment, the problem isn't my overly sensitive moment. The problem is that I was ignorant of it. The problem is my ignorance. In men's sensitivity isn't the problem. Men's ignorance is the problem. It's their ignorance of their sensitivity. It's the ignorance of their vulnerability. That's the problem, not the sensitivity. The sensitivity is never the problem. The sensitivity can become a great ally once it is transformed, once it is used, once it becomes a vehicle and a tool for you to become more efficacious in your capacity to lead and move forward.
and I, I'm not even going to say I believe. I know that men are built to be sensitive. We are naturally this way. This is how we're made. And any guy who thinks he's not sensitive can walk into a room or sometimes like get a text message from his woman and read the tone and the feeling and the emotion and know, is she pissed off? Is she angry? Is she off? Is she down? Is she sad? Is she happy? Is she horny? Like, you can read that in the energy of just a text message or seeing her sitting on the couch across the room. Like, you can feel that. Like, that is masculine sensitivity of our woman. We just we just know. We don't even have to try. It's so natural for men.
Right.
So, and we're built this way. Like, it's just what we do. We don't even have to try. All we have to do is get the fuck out of our own way. To get the hell out of our own way, because for me, I was the super sensitive kid. I was the kid who got teased for being gay when I was in like middle school because I was, probably a little femmy as a boy when I was 9, 10, 11 years old. I wasn't like the stereotypical farm kid, even though I grew up on a farm in a small town where there was a lot of farm kids. I didn't look like them. I didn't act like them. I didn't feel like I was one of them. I was always the kid who was into music and into art and into, you know, not the same shit that a lot of other boys were. And I also had a lot of feelings. And so I got teased to fucking hell for being, you know, like what boys say to other boys. It was, I mean, it was constant. And so I started looking at these parts of me that were a little bit more sensitive as bad or wrong or not manly. And I tried to like be different. But when I started out by saying like sensitivity is what gives dominance its oomph. Anybody can take the what David Data calls the first stage masculine approach, which is like just, the club her over the head and drag her back to the cave kind of masculinity.
Hmm.
Like anybody that looks at a man like that, like, yeah, that's a man, but he's a dick. Nobody wants to be around him. Really, it's just pure machismo and it's boring. But a man who can have his heart and be strong enough to lead and take charge in situations and care about the people he's leading, like deeply care, to actually have empathy. That's a word that we've talked about recently too. Like that's all a part of what makes dominance really different and special because it gives a submissive woman the ability to really know that she's being felt and cared for and cared about and not just clubbed over the head and dragged back to the cave. But it's the same, to your point, the ability to also turn that inward and be aware of your own internal experience. It it all comes very naturally to us as men when we just release the shame around it.
Yeah, exactly. I think what you just said, shame is a big word. I think when we attach shame to any time that we're vulnerable, anytime that we are sensitive, anytime that we have feelings, anytime that we're expressing what we associate as being feminine, I think that there's a latent inner misogyny that most men have, that they condemn, judge anything that they associate as weak, as vulnerable, as sensitive. And all of those things in a moment of conflict may, in fact, not be helpful, right? Often are not. But most of life is not a moment of conflict. Most of life is actually at a time where we are here to grow. And there's no growth without severing parts of ourselves. And there's no way to sever part of ourselves without being sensitive to it. Like there has to be pruning, there has to be death. Look at nature. Every single year, it dies and is reborn. There has to be that in ourself if we are to grow, if we are to mature. And there's a process of death and decay and rebirth. And men don't want to do it. We don't want to do it because it's so painful, so awful. And when we're going through it, we have shame, we have judgment, we feel like we're wrong. Like I have an injury. It's the same thing with an injury. As soon as I got injured, I've been dealing with so much shame, so much like unworthiness, so much feeling like I can't, I'm less of a man, I'm less of a human because I'm injured. You have something, I could tell you
Yeah.
want to jump in.
Like the the potential danger in pruning without being attuned to our truth, to our authenticity, is
Yeah,
we're going to prune the wrong shit.
well said. And the other thing, it lacks intentionality. What you talked about prior
Mhm.
is we can choose what we prune if we bring. That's the whole point of consciousness. The whole point of consciousness, when we say conscious dom, we actually kind of mean conscious pruning. I think that's actually what we're doing internally. What is it that's helpful? What is it that's not helpful? It is the pruning quality. That's what really truly being a dom is. It's when you say no to your woman. It's when you say no to yourself. That's when they feel your leadership. It's not when you are making things happen and everybody wants it and all the good things. That's not as hard. It's much harder when you're having to stop, when you're having to prune, when you're having to, and to do that for ourselves is the true dominance. That's the true leadership.
Well, and that's why all dominance, if you want to be dominant instead of just doing dominant things, if you actually want to be dominant, you have to direct this energy inward. You have to
Correct.
you have to gain a strength that you feel. So
Correct.
you are being strong instead of just acting like it. And that's why, like, if we prune the wrong shit, we're actually going to end up pruning our actual strength and leaving behind our real weakness.
That's I love when we get going and talking and we're phrasing things that are, it's like a concept and an idea that I've thought a lot about, but just the right word just pops up. And I love this pruning metaphor right here because, and what you're talking about, because it rings so true when it comes to sexuality. I feel like a lot of men prune their sexuality. They prune their desire. They prune their lust. They just get rid of it. They're like, oh, that's a complication. So I'm going to just cut that off and then focus. And they do that, especially when they get married or when they get into a religion and they proceed. But what they've done is they cut off their life force. They've cut off their fire. They've cut off their chi. They've cut off that desire. They've cut off access to their 18-year-old self. I can access my 18-year-old self. I can remain hard like an 18-year-old, come again and again and again and stay hard. That comes from the fact that I have pruned other parts of me that are unhelpful. And I have kept the desire, I've kept the fire. And that comes from Rachel. Rachel is such a great example of that and has held that and has encouraged that and really held that. But that doesn't come from like me just being like, I am the man and I'm dominant. It comes literally from my capacity to prune the unnecessary parts and to say yes to the parts that are scary because they seem a little unwieldy.
Well, yeah. And sensitivity isn't weakness. Everything men do, we're trying to find freedom. We're in pursuit of freedom.
Right.
And so when we are looking at ourselves, we are going to try generally to avoid the things that feel like weakness and to lean into the things that feel like strength. And that's why, without understanding the necessity of our sensitivity, our ability to feel, I love this phrase. I love this phrase that she needs to feel you feeling her.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll maybe come back to that, but we have to be able to tune in and to tune into that and to appreciate its necessity, to being able to look her in the eye and say, like, this is how you're going to serve me. This is how we are going to live our lives. This is what is going to happen now or 2 weeks from Tuesday. And to say you're going to give up control of your life and follow the lead that I lay out for you, it's absolutely necessary that we have the ability to connect to what her experience is of that so we don't just turn into little fucking tyrants.
Yeah, and the tyrants have a limitation. There's a limited amount of growth that you can exceed. I mean, you will end up hurting her and yourself in the process when you lack that sensitivity. It's just inherent. I mean, we see this again and again and again, where there are parts of yourself that you're not tending to. And it's truly our own capacity to hold up, like I said before, like to be sensitive with the parts of ourselves that feel weak, our own inner feminine. And we can sit there and hold that and hold those desires that don't make sense, those desires that maybe feel like a little boy, or those needs or those pains, and not let them run the show, not let them rule everything, but sit with them, see what their needs are at the appropriate time, in the appropriate way. You can move through them. They don't have to be there holding you hostage your entire life. You can address them, move through them, and move on to the next thing. It's the same way that you can do with her. If you can't do it to yourself, you can't do it with her. If you can't hold your own inner feminine, your own inner vulnerability, your own inner sensitivity, if you're not able to do that with yourself, you're not going to be able to do that with her. And if you are judging your own inner sensitivity and feel like that's lame, you're going to inherently judge or condemn or be impatient with her sensitivity. And so as you are able to hold your own, you're able to hold her. And it's her sensitivity, her weather, her feelings, her emotions that you need to be able to sit with without folding underneath. And when that practice literally comes from you doing it to yourself. And the richer your own inner life and the things and the experiences, it's hard. Like it's a very difficult thing. This is not something that I want to say is super easy. This is actually the hardest thing I've ever done.
Yep. Yep. The hands down the hardest thing I've ever done. I'm right there with you. And you know, we an interesting thing about our sensitivity is it is our ability to receive. You know, like you mentioned, if we aren't being it with ourselves, we can't be it with her. But if we can't be it with her, we can't receive from her. Because the same thing that's our natural sensitivity, that is our openness. That's our ability to, for example, be loved and let ourselves feel and receive love, to let ourselves feel and receive admiration, to let ourselves receive, if we want to start getting real spiritual here, to receive all the abundance of the universe that it has to pour into us, because we have to be able to receive with the same part of ourselves that allows us to be sensitive and tuned in to the emotions and feelings of others. And so if we are not open to, if we don't have our hearts open, and that's really what we're talking about here, is having an open heart.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't have our hearts open, not only can we not like dom well and lead well and take charge well and take care of ourselves well, we also can't let ourselves be loved. We can't let ourselves be looked up to. We can't receive anything.
That's really well said. I hadn't thought of it exactly like that, that the sensitivity has to do with the reception. That's really well said. And our capacity to receive. It's not just a going out, it's also a coming in. Obviously it's that, but just the way you said that, it just really shifted something for me.
And this whole thing comes back to the concept of polarity, right? We think about polarity really easily when it comes to sex. The more dominant I am and the more submissive Don is, the hotter our sex is. That's pretty, it's pretty basic understanding. Like the more manly the man is and the more girly the woman is, the hotter the sex is going to be, because it's the differences or the opposites that attract. But internally, we're built like batteries. Like we have a positive end of the battery and we have a negative end of the battery. And the positive end of the battery is where the energy goes out from. And in men, that's our cock. Like that's us sexually. It's also like, but it's also um, emblematic of our going out into the world with leadership, with directionality, um, with every way that we penetrate the world with our consciousness, with our awareness, with our truth. So that's
Mm-hmm.
the positive end of the battery. The negative end of the battery is the heart. And that's our feminine. Like that's our inner
Mm-hmm.
feminine. That's the feminine is receptivity, period. That's what defines the feminine. That's why like the man is a stick and the woman is a hole. Like the stick goes in the hole. And that's sexual polarity, but emotional polarity, like a woman is built to be her plus, her positive polarity, her masculine is her heart and our feminine is our heart. And so she's giving to us and we are receiving from her. And that has to be in balance with what we desire out of sexual polarity.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing that allows her to love us, to want us, to share authentic desire with us, to let us receive all of what she wants to give us, that is the same thing that lets us tune into feelings. It's the same thing that lets us tune into ourselves and be present with ourselves and to look after ourselves and take care of ourselves. We only receive as men in one place, and it's our heart.
Are you saying that the tool of sensitivity is our heart?
100%. Well, sensitivity is receptivity, and
Mm-hmm.
we're receptive in our hearts as men, period.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to find the least sensitive man, here's the evidence by looking at the opposite. The least sensitive man is the man who's the most concerned with getting his dick sucked because he's trying to receive in his cock. He's all about getting sex. His battery's upside down because that same guy is
Mm-hmm.
going to be very much like sharing how he feels and trying to receive sex. Like he's all about what he gets, not what he gives.
Hmm.
Like these things work in perfect balance. So the
Hmm.
more expressive of our emotions we are, the less sensitive we can be because all of our energy is going out from our heart instead of open to come into it.
Hmm. And I think we don't always know that we have these. Sometimes when we're being overly expressive or emotional or something like that, it's actually our pain. It's actually looking for. It's a way of being like honing that's like, hey, I'm hurt, I'm hurt, I'm hurt, I'm hurt, I'm hurt. I need help, I need help, I need help. But you're not doing it consciously or aware of that, and you're needing. But the way forward literally is to start receiving, and that only can happen when your heart is ruptured a bit and breaks, and it can only really happen when you stop and you pause and you become receptive, and that can only happen often for most men, a lot of men, if they're injured or on their deathbed, or if they're in great love, if they are being loved. So there are these, or they go through some, psychedelic experience, I think is another way that people can experience that.
Or they hit rock bottom
Or they hit
and have
rock
their
bottom,
whole
correct.
life fall apart.
Yeah. But you have to be cracked open, and that is truly a vulnerable. I mean, talk about vulnerability. We have these words like vulnerability. Bullshit. If you're able to be vulnerable and it feels easy, you're not being vulnerable. Like if you're strategizing being vulnerable, that's not vulnerability. Like vulnerability is getting punched, like putting your face right there. And it is seriously a feeling that's awful. It feels awful.
It's my favorite word to get at what vulnerability feels like is exposure. Like
Yeah.
in some ways, it's like being emotionally naked in front of a room full of people because you just bared something that felt so deeply buried and unacceptable to open up. And when you let
Right.
it be seen, it really is kind of like you're just stripped naked in front of a crowd.
Yeah. And it's true. And it's counterintuitive that that's a part the way forward. Like that's if you're not feeling that in your death rebirth experience, you're not actually doing death rebirth and experience. Like it it is by definition by that it requires us to go through these places where we feel completely the opposite of how we necessarily want to feel. And so you have to traverse a place. This is why the myths talk about going into the cave or going into the whale's belly or into the darkness or into the dark. All of these things ask of us to do the complete opposite. It's to lay the sword down, to lay the fight down, to lay the sex down, to lay the, you know, and
Yeah.
it's the thing that I'm finding is that when you start breaking your heart open, I'm actually going through this right now. I'm back in a place that I was when I was in a very challenging place in my life. And you start opening up your heart, you're going to have a backlog. Do when you hit the
Oh,
metaphor that
God,
comes to
yes.
mind is that there's a uh, in a stream, and there's some rocks and some trees that are blocking the flow of the stream. And then all of a sudden you move that little dam that's been happening. Maybe there's a little trickle, and then there's just this flow, and all this crap comes through, and all this stuff. That's what it feels like when you break your heart open. You're going to have this backlog of feelings that you couldn't feel when you were younger. You couldn't feel when you were hurt before. There may have been periods where you got bullied, or you had some breakup, or you had some other kind of extent, and you literally closed yourself off. I closed myself off during those moments, and I was not able to feel the full extent of those. And now I'm feeling them, but I'm feeling that on top of feeling another thing, on top of feeling another thing, and it's overwhelming. And this is what, like when you do EMDR, this is what when you do these healing practices, why what you're talking about, like intentionality is so key. Setting is so key. I've had some experience with psychedelics, and where you do it, who you do it with, when you do it, all of those things are so important. They call it set and setting. It's so important for the experience. The experience that we have when we do trauma work, when we are feeling sensitive, when we're doing sensitivity work, it is literally the same thing as a psychedelic experience. Like they're one and the same. You can go to psychedelic-like experiences when you do true healing work, no drugs, just purely going back through your memory, going back through your past, and truly feeling it all to the full extent of the feelings that you weren't allowing yourself to feel. And most importantly, not acting from that feeling, but holding yourself in that. That's where you get the gift. Most guys start feeling all this stuff, short circuit, then start punching walls, start hitting, start moving that energy out because they can't hold it. But if you can hold it, hold it, hold it, hold it, you start tripping. It's almost like taking, it is like taking, you start having these other states of consciousness. And in those states, you start to experience and see truth. You see truth. And I know you've had these experiences. You've talked to God. I talked to God. We've had these experiences. They're on the other side of this work that we've done. It's not, you don't need to take drugs to experience it. You just have to show up to yourself. You have to show up to the parts of yourself that you are most afraid to show up to.
Yes, extremely well said. And, we've met some people who are psychedelic therapists who do this psychedelic work professionally. And
Yeah.
we've, like, Don and I have never tried them, never done them, no experience at all. And we compared notes with these people who have done it themselves lots of times and led lots of other people through it, and like what our journey has been like versus what they see. And yeah, it is very much a similar experience of, yeah, coming to truth, coming to awareness of reality just through pure presence.
Yeah, and I think one of the hardest things that we have to go through, well said, and what you've done in your journey, and I think in many ways you're farther along, and having gotten this 5 years with this level of commitment, I feel like a newbie in being conscious in my journey. I feel like I've had a lot of experiences when it comes to DS and these kind of experiences, but not from
Mhm.
a very conscious place. And I think coming into it with this conscious place, what the biggest difference for me is my own work and my own internal work and my own part to play in the picture. It's not just me doing this to someone else, it's me doing this with me. That is by far the biggest. And once you start doing that, there almost is this moment, and I'm in it, where you have to periodically be like, I'm like, Rachel, I'm not effective right now as the leader that you need me to be. I literally need to, what I call like a retrograde moment. It's like, I need to take a moment. I need to just be like in my place of regeneration. It's in my
Yeah.
winter. It's in my healing. And these right now, I'm in the middle of an EMDR kind of program, and that shit's real. Like that's a very powerful. I've done therapy in the past, but doing this now, it comes up in these waves, and then you're really in it, and being in it and being in this. I see the progress. I see the journey. I see the potential, but it can only happen by acknowledging that I'm not able to be the person that I want to be yet. And I think that's one of the hardest things for me, is to be like, oh, wait, I have things to learn. I have a lot of things to learn. I have massive things to learn. And to admit that I don't know, how to do things sexually, that I don't know how to do things when it comes to leading you in the most effective way, that I don't know how to proceed in these certain areas of our personal life or these other things in my life. Admitting that I don't know, being in a state of not knowing, and still holding my own rectitude, my own, strength, is challenging. And I fold sometimes. Like there are times when I will completely be overwhelmed by the flood of feeling inadequate, and that comes because I'm feeling all the ways that I've been adequate my whole life. And when I prior in old relationships that were unconscious, I felt very adequate. I felt great. I felt like awesome. Why? Because my heart was shut down.
Yeah,
I
because
didn't feel
you weren't hearing anything to the contrary.
exactly. I didn't care what people thought. I didn't feel what they were feeling. I didn't care what how it was affecting other people. I didn't care how I was hurt. And so I went around really cocky, really confident, really effective. And men are like, why would you stop that? Well, that only takes you from 0 to 4, let's say on a scale, right? Or 0 to like 3. If you want to go up to 10, or you want to go to the next peak place that's so beyond anything that could go, you have to go back down, regroup. It's like going back down to base camp, doing some work, and then you go back up. And you have to go back down, and then you go back up. And that period of time, you have to go backwards. We don't want to go backwards. We're like, what the fuck? I don't want to go backwards. I don't want to take out. I don't want to be out for the count. But that's the same thing as a physical injury. You have to go and you do your physical therapy. We have to do emotional therapy. We have to do trauma therapy. You don't do that work, what's going to happen? You're going to go 4, and you're only going to cap at
Yep.
4 or 5. You're not going to
And
be
you're just
able to
going to keep
go
and you're going to keep
bouncing up,
breaking.
and you're going to keep breaking. Exactly. You're going to keep breaking, and you're going to literally be way more sensitive than the person who's acknowledging the sensitivity. The
Right.
man who's unacknowledged sensitivity, he's way more sensitive, and everyone sees that, and everyone's tiptoeing around him. And the women in his life are not actually speaking the truth to them because they're afraid of his reaction. That's not
Right.
dominance.
No. And that's not sensitivity, that's reactivity,
Yeah,
right? Like
exactly.
we have to define, and this is a good place of like being precise with our language, because it's not sensitivity to be triggered and hot tempered. Like that's not a sensitive man, that's a reactive man.
That's a really good point, Andrew.
That's a man who's being drug into his weakness
Hmm.
by external events and is now acting out emotionally. So sensitivity is about a receptive heart. And when we are like expressing outwardly massively, like a hot temper is an expressive heart. It is lashing out emotionally. So sensitivity for a man, for a dominant man, for a man who's strong is about being receptive. It's about receiving. It is
Wow.
sensitivity is not lashing outward from our heart. That's the opposite of sensitivity. That's
Well
emotional
said.
reactivity.
It's
And
a really,
this,
really important.
yeah, it's extremely important. It's a very important delineation. And this is why men, we need other fucking men in our
Hmm.
lives who we can be that way around. Because guess what? You made a really, really good point about the way we store this shit from our past.
Hmm.
I like the way Michael Singer talks about this in The Untethered Soul. He talks about how most things, like when you're driving down a road and you drive past tens of thousands of trees on a road trip, and
Hmm.
all those trees in your periphery, you see them all, but none of them get stuck. Like they just get noticed and forgotten,
Hmm.
just like the white line on the road and like almost everything else that we see and experience. It just comes in and goes right back out.
Hmm.
Certain things get stuck. They don't that we experience or that happen. They come in and they get stuck, and we until we feel those, we are carrying them around, and those are the cause of that reactivity. They're the cause of that, those lashing out, or like the shutting down, because some people don't lash out. Some people, patient one here, just would stuff it and shut it down instead of
Hmm.
lashing out with it. But it's the same thing. It's the inability to be with that. And so in order to come to a place of a receptive sensitivity and the to carry the kind of gentleness that only strength can afford to have,
Hmm. Hmm.
We've got to have other men in our lives who we can get that shit out with, who we can, all those things that came in and got stuck, the getting bullied, the getting abused, the getting hurt, the getting dumped by my fucking high school girlfriend that just crushed me when I was 15. Like all these things that really fucking hurt because we have sensitive hearts. We're built that way. We're made that way to be sensitive. And so when things happen to us, especially as boys, it hurts. And we like that's why men build walls around our hearts because we're so fucking sensitive. It's not because we're hard asses, it's because we get hurt so easily
Yeah.
and we build
And
these
that, and I also
walls.
want to honor the walls that we build. Like they're necessary.
Oh,
You know,
100%.
they're necessary. It's like a different stage in the game. Like build the wall right now. We'll deal with it later. Like if you're in a stressful situation, that's not a time to feel it. Like if you're in a sport or you're in a battle or you're in a fight or like that's not the time. Or you're a kid with your parents that are abusing you or whatever. You can't feel it right then. And that's
Yeah.
appropriate. That's okay.
Yeah.
But you can't just leave it there forever. Like you got to go back, open it up, feel it, do the work, and keep going. And I think a lot of times we open it up. It's too painful. It's too awful. We try. We're like, never mind, shove
Yep.
it back down. And
Yeah.
then, but the key is to keep going. And like you said, it truly does. I have found I need someone else to hold the space for me. Uh, it really is important. You
Yeah.
can do some of it on your own, and you get to a place I can hold a lot on my own now, but there was a lot that I've needed to have someone else holding that.
Well, and that's why we need other men to do this because first of all, if we try to do this in our relationship, especially with a woman who we're asking to submit to us, to follow us, if we start processing our shit with her, now we're putting her into the exact opposite energy. We're making her turn her battery upside down so we can turn our battery upside down. Now she's the one in charge. She's having to hold us. She's the one who's having to comfort us and console us. And while that is possible, like she can do that, it's not supportive of the kind of relationships that we're trying to develop if we want to have these power exchange, if we want to have this intense masculine feminine sexual polarity, we have to keep the emotional polarity in the relationship right also, which means we need to be receiving her feelings
Mm-hmm.
so she can receive our consciousness, our truth, our sex. So being that men have the naturally sensitive, open, receptive hearts, being able to be in the presence of a man who can be like, I got you. Like, let it all out. Cry if you need to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, let me put on some boxing gear. And if you need to hit some shit, fucking hit me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
let's like take it out with me so that you can express it and get it out. And then you like that's what helps us drop the walls. That's what lets us set the walls down so we can go back into our relationship and other parts of our lives having
Yeah.
cleared some of that backlog of energy and those things that happened in the past that got stuck, we can let them out and then they aren't taking up space anymore. And now we can not only can we feel more of what she's feeling, but we can also actually let ourselves be loved.
Well said. Yeah. I'm dealing with a lot of my own judgment of my past and judgment of my pain and pain body and weakness and abuse and my own, yeah, just a lot of judgment of it. And my EMDR therapist said to me, if there's one thing, is to, lay off the judgment. And that has been the hardest thing. I am so judgmental of it. Growing up in a religion where I have since left, but religion teaches judgment. And it's, and being a man and being somebody who's very strong in my masculine traits, it is so hard not to judge. I judge, and I especially judge the parts of myself that I find to be unproductive, unhelpful. And what I'm having to realize, and it's truly through work in, there's a I don't know how to describe it, but it's a kind of a practice, a healing modality. It's related to the I Ching and a number of other things, but it's called the Gene Keys. And I've actually found that to be really helpful
Mm.
in, especially in its regard and its relationship to the shadow part of myself. And one of the ethics of that and the ethos of that is that we accept and allow and embrace our shadow sides so that we can transform them. And it wasn't really until I started through Rachel looking at the gene keys that I was able to reframe the parts of myself that were my shadow parts and see them as seeds for my gifts. That literally by allowing, accepting, and embracing the parts of myself that I felt like were the most weak, vulnerable, annoying, whatever, it was in holding myself in those that I've been able to alchemize that and come out the other side and find strength. And that process to me is dominance, is conscious dominance. Like it is when we take, because that's what we do with the feminine when she's in a state that she's not liking, that she's in a swirl, that she's in her shadow, or anything in life that's off. If we can accept the moment, embrace it, be present with it, it's the truth it is, and we're not trying to change it. And then in that moment, we can transform it. Our job is being the alchemist. We are the magician. In the tarot, we are the magician. The Dom is the magician. We're here to alchemize. We're here to transform. This is the great teachings throughout the Middle Ages of when they called alchemy and they called the magicians and they call, people that were out there and the mystics. Their great power was to transform the negative things in life into positive things in life in their inside. The gold wasn't in the cave. Literally, the gold was in the cave of their soul, hidden by the dragon, which is like their ego. And through that is the gold. And when you can tame that dragon becomes your ally. You become an embodiment of a dragon. You become all that ego that was there protecting these little vulnerable places can align with you. And you have an embodied strength that's so powerful. You become a dragon incarnate. You become the embodiment of divine masculine, like a force of nature. But that can only come when you've been able to alchemize the petty parts of yourself, or the parts that you consider petty or the weak or the vulnerable, these other parts.
So I'm curious for you, um, my experience of working on my shadow side has really been realizing that the things, and when we say shadow side, right, we're saying all the things about ourselves that we've judged as not okay.
Right.
Like the parts of ourself that we've judged as bad.
Or that we are ignoring too.
Right. Yeah. Just
Right.
everything that we shoved in the closet, everything about ourselves that we shoved in the closet,
Right.
that we put in the back of the storage shed and we just aren't going to look there. The stuff we
Right.
avoid. For me, I've found that those are some of the most powerful parts of myself. And the way that I realized that was by looking at the amount of energy that it takes to suppress them.
Correct.
Like the amount of time I spend thinking and ruminating about how to keep those things shoved back and shoved down and suppressed. The amount of like petty manipulation of how I show up in the world and what I expect out of other people, like the amount of shit that went into keeping those things down showed how much power they had, because I look at this um like a counterbalance, like a counterbalance weight. The however big those things are, they need an equal amount of energy to suppress them. And so there's big energy in these things, and that's why we hide them, because they're so powerful, because there's so much gold to your alchemy reference there. There's so much gold in them that we have, it takes a ton of energy to keep them in the dark.
And they become fodder for taboo. They become fodder for the gold can become scenes. It can become like, isn't that true? Like the things that were the shadow parts of you that you didn't want to see, they become part of your sexuality. Like
Right. Well,
this is obvious, but
that's what happens when we integrate the shadow is we get to bring all of the gold out and
there's way
realize that the
more toys to play with.
exactly. It's bringing more energy. It's
Yeah,
bringing more aliveness into ourselves because
more potentiality.
right, that's all like there here was one that blew my mind when it really sunk all the way in, and I hope somebody hears this and has the same experience. There is not a good and bad part of you. There's just one you. It's
Yeah,
all you. All the things you don't like about yourself, all the things like those are parts of you too.
it's yes.
There
I
aren't like a good part and a bad part of Andrew. There's just fucking Andrew. And so if I can take all of the parts of me and bring acceptance to them and then find the good in them and bring them into my life, integrate them into how I'm living. You know, talk about inner sensitivity, like tuning into the parts of myself that I hated, like the things I hated about myself, to go there and be with those and to really listen to them and find out what it is. Like, why did I hate them? Why did I decide that these are bad things?
that's the courage.
100%. And it takes a lot of receptivity. I have to be able to receive that part of myself back into myself.
Mm, yeah. Whew. Hmm. Truth.
And that sucks. Like
Oh,
anybody listening to this, that fucking sucks. You know,
it really is. You're grating. It feels like someone's scraping in the bottom of your inner sides and like touching your stomach, like just scraping out all the muck and
you
bringing it up.
yuck.
You know, that's what it feels like, and you're sitting with it, and every part of you that wants to end. Like, and this is why you do have to be careful, and why it's important to have someone there or someone that cares about you, loves you in the midst of this, because you can go to some pretty dark places. And I
Well,
don't recommend doing this.
you have to go to the dark places.
Yeah,
That's
yeah. I should say it another way. You will go to, like, you will. That's why
yeah.
it's you have to have some container of light, of love. You know, one of the things that I've been feeling and really tapping into in this whole experience that is really, really, really powerful, that I've spoken with you before and again and here, but the dynamic between Rachel and I is much more dynamic between me and me. You know, the it is me, and you spoke about this earlier, but I want to put this, like, if we could just have like a defining thing of conscious dominance, to me, it is you're consciously dominating yourself. And when you do that, the woman follows. Any woman you want will follow. Like, that's the byproduct of it. That's like, it's like if you're a great gardener, you put your focus on the soil, and a rich soil, and the flowers just fucking they come, right? They just
Yep.
bloom, right place, right setting. This, for you, you're the soil. You're the soil. You and nurture, and just like soil, there's going to be decay, there's going to be rot, and there's going to be a period of time where your things have to die, and you get nourished in that, and it enriches that soil, and it makes it into something rich, nutritious. And if you just add chemicals to it, and if you just, it may last for a couple of years, and that's the same way of closing it down and not allowing the death process to be there. And the death process takes a moment, just like with soil, like it takes a moment. But on the other side of it, the soil is going to be so much richer. And if you can allow yourself to move slowly, to be patient, to be kind, to be gentle, that these qualities actually lead to strength. And it's a strength that is not fragile. It is a strength that is it is the strength. Like, you become a a conduit of whatever term you want to use for that force of nature. We could call it God, the masculine force, whatever force that you want to the chi, life force, whatever, that becomes your, you are a conduit of that, but that can only come through your sensitivity and allowance of the death process of the parts of you that had held that back in the past and then have strangled that. And every time that you allow yourself to feel that fully, as you move forward, you and feel it again and allow the full nature of the process, you come on the other side with more chi, more life force, more energy, more of a vigor and a vitality that's only there on the other side of that.
And this, like, you just articulated the why behind the question you brought earlier when, guys would be like, why would you ever want to, like, go beyond, being like the guy who didn't give a fuck and just did whatever you wanted to women and, you know, kind of had that first stage masculine dominance. Like, this is the why, because it gets to be all of like everything you want, but in a way where you can also receive love. You get to have
Yes.
like all of the dominance, and you get to love yourself, and you get to feel the love of other people. And oh, by the way, if you want to be the kind of man that any woman will throw themselves at, be a man who embodies a natural, solid inner strength that you believe in for yourself honestly, where
Mm.
you take charge of yourself and every part of your life just because this is the way it is in my life, and also really give a fuck and care deeply about the people around you. Be able to be that sensitive and receptive and attuned, and also that strong and solid. You want any woman like that. That's the kind of man that women ditch their relation, like their husbands of 20 years, to like go follow around the country and
Right. And it's,
chase across the country, because it is fucking rare. It's so rare.
yeah. And it's when men prioritize themselves, they're often just prioritizing one aspect of themselves. And what we're trying to say is prioritize all parts of yourself. Prioritize the parts of yourself that have been wounded, the parts of yourself that have been hurt, parts of yourself that you don't want to look at, the shadow parts of yourself. Prioritize the healing, prioritize your health, prioritize your mental health, prioritize your flexibility, your vulnerability, like the fullness of yourself. When you can do that and truly prioritize yourself in that regard, that's when the woman will look at you and be like, oh, I want that. Because she knows that you are not being a martyr. You're not being someone who's going to be easily pushed around. You're not going to be easily, changeable. Like, you have to put yourself first. This is another like ethic of this. You have to put yourself first. But the way to put yourself first, ironically, it's by being sensitive. It's by being sensitive to the parts of yourself that necessitate healing, that necessitate wholeness, that necessitate work, that may take you out of a capacity to be there for other people in the short term. So the long term, just like financially and money wise, if we're not willing to make sacrifices in the short term, we'll never be able to have wealth in the long term. Same thing with dominance and women and these kind of things. We have to make sacrifices in the short term for long term wealth.
Yeah. And this is a part of why we get impatient with this shit as men, is because if we, oh, and by the way, why men will bury themselves in work and numb themselves with substances and all kinds of other things, because we can't control things when we are receptive to them.
Ooh, ooh.
It's very easy to go work harder and make more money. It's very easy
Ouch.
to go earn, like, we
Mm,
can apply logic and effort and like A plus B plus C equals D kind of energy
mm,
to our work, and to
right.
like even to fitness, right? You go to the gym, you work out, you eat well.
It's linear.
It's very linear. When we're receiving things, it's not linear. We aren't in control of it. We just
No,
have
we're
to
not.
take it.
That's Ooh, so
And
true.
we just have to receive it and sometimes just sit with it and be patient with it and not do a damn thing with it because we can't fix it. We just
That's why
have to
pain is such a great teacher.
like what we're doing is creating with the out of the energy that we receive. And this is where you've used this word before, like we make art out of this stuff. Well, this is where we're making art. We're receiving that which we can't
Mm-hmm.
control, but it
Mm-hmm.
is the raw materials of the art that
Mm-hmm.
we can make out of what we receive and then what we do with it.
Mm-hmm.
Another one of your words, regenerative. And like we can take all of this and let some of it die, be patient with some of it, learn from it, figure out what it means, and then lead forward with that information, not being told what to do, but being well informed as to all of the potentialities.
You know, Andrew, as always, I'm feeling you just hitting on something. It's almost like you have to live something and then hear it to really truly know it, right? Like I think it's something that I feel again and again, like have the experience, then learn about it, and that'll really cement in the learning, right? Often we do it the other way around. We learn about something and then we go and experience it. And I think sometimes you have the experience and then you have the learning. And what you're saying right there about the reception being you can't control that. This week I have been experiencing so much pain, like a physical pain that's really off the chart, and the last couple of weeks, but also extreme pleasure. And I'm here with Rachel, and she's extremely pleasurable. And so the combination of the two has been a mind fuck because I recognize how similar they are. And that for me to be able to experience extreme pleasure, I actually have to receive and I have to not control. And I realize, like, oh my God, I have limited the amount of pleasure that I can experience because I have wanted to maintain control at all times. I have not experienced that much pleasure in my life. And it's so much of my dominance is me trying to be in control. It's me trying to make sure that I'm not being vulnerable. I know all this. I know I've gone to enough therapy to know why I am. I mean, I'm also naturally this way, but I know the problematic nature of it. And I think one of the things that I'm also experiencing in your as you're saying this, so there's that thing about pleasure and knowing that, but the other thing about it that's wild and feeling this is that you can't actually go through this healing process and the true feeling of healing without receiving love. And if you were someone who wasn't able to fully receive, you can't receive the potential love that becomes what you are able to then regenerate. Because I think as doms, we essentially become love. Like the whole point of this, going back to the beginning of the episode when you're like, we can't do this unless you're love. The whole point of it is to be a vehicle and a conduit of love. And so I can only do that if I'm able to receive love. Like if I'm cutting off my reception to love, I'm like limiting my amount. And that I can receive love from my woman, but I can at least receive love just as easily from being in the ocean and from the stars and from the sun and from the earth and from these other. I can receive love at all times if I allow my heart to be in that receptive place. But if I'm closing it off, I'm walking around, I'm like, it's like someone trying to give you a bunch of money all the time and you're like, no, I don't want it, I don't want it, I don't want it. But if your heart's open, you're getting fuel for love. That love then that is the
It's the
force, that
energy.
is the fuel that allows you to hold yourself in those moments, to do the regenerative healing, to do the alchemizing for yourself. And then also is the fuel to hold your woman in those states when she's going through it. Essentially, all she needs is your love. Like that's all that she needs. And this week, I kept trying to she was talking and doing some things. And I was like trying to fix. I'm such a guy, right? Like I fix, I'm trying to give answers and all this. And she's like, Eric, I don't need that. I just need your love. And it was like, what? That's all you need? Like, that's it? And I felt like it wasn't enough. But in this moment, I really am understanding, and I think I understood it then, but I'm understanding that's everything. Like there is nothing bigger than that. Like that is the ultimate gift. And you can't get to that unless unless you open up your sensitivity. And I think that's a beautiful sort of like full circle and maybe a place to tie a bow on it.
I couldn't I couldn't think of a better way to wrap it up. So really good stuff. Thank you, buddy.
Thank you. Thank you.
See you next time.